Hi, today we're going to talk about ePortfolio, an alternative assessment tool. I would like to start by reading to you the vision of Suleiman University, a leading Christian institution committed to total human development for the well-being of society and environment. Part of our mission in this university is to provide opportunities for growth and excellence in every dimension of the university life in order to strengthen character, competence, and faith. The objectives of this webinar are the following: to present the meaning, purpose, and the theory and practice of an assessment student portfolio, to suggest steps in designing and developing an e-portfolio, and to show examples and best practices in creating and assessing one. So how do we define an e-portfolio? It says here, it is a digital collection created by a student of their course-related work. So this collection might consist of essays, student reflections, posters, photographs, videos, artwork, or any other artifact that you want them to produce. An academic e-portfolio, therefore, can capture other aspects of a student's life, such as volunteer experiences, extracurricular activities, and more. In other words, e-portfolios document and make visible student learning. So, an e-portfolio can also be used to assess student learning in terms of its product and in terms of the process of creating the portfolio. It can also be controlled and managed by the student. And definitely, because it's an e-portfolio, it exists online. Is there a bad portfolio or a good portfolio? My slide here says that a good student portfolio is both about being a product, meaning a digital collection of artifacts, and a process. And we mean a process of reflecting on those artifacts and what they represent. So take note of the two P's. A good portfolio is both a product and a process. Student-centered e-portfolios are driven by assessment for learning, which refers to academic assignments that fulfill the traditional role of assessing student learning, while at the same time providing an opportunity for students to learn as they complete the assessment. The primary purpose of an assessment portfolio is to document student learning on specific curriculum outcomes. As such, the items in the portfolio must be designed to elicit or draw out the knowledge and skill specified in the outcomes. So what does the literature say about e-portfolios? E-portfolios fall within a learning theory known as social constructivism, which proposes in part that learning happens most effectively when students construct systems of knowledge for themselves, rather than simply having information presented, or rather than simply regurgitating the information that you gave them. It's easy to focus exclusively on the final product, such as an essay, and to overlook the stages of learning and doing that preceded the product. By reflecting on these invisible stages, students can learn more. They can learn more deeply. They can learn more about how they learn, and they can learn how to do better next time. I have here suggested steps in developing an assessment e-portfolio system. 1. Determine the curricular objectives to be addressed through the portfolio. So what are your objectives? Why do you want your students to compile reflections, for example? Why do you want them to come up with compilations? So look at your curricular objectives vis-a-vis the tasks that you're going to ask them. So that leads us to number 2. Design assessment tasks for the curricular objectives. Ensure that the task matches instructional intentions and adequately represents the content and skills, including the appropriate level of difficulty students are expected to attain. These considerations will ensure the validity of the assessment task. So you see there's again an alignment between what you want them to do, that's your objectives, and what tasks do you want them to perform based on your intention. Number 3, define the criteria for each assessment task and establish performance standards for each criterion. So what are your standards? In case they can already come up with a portfolio. Okay? And number 4, you need to determine who will evaluate the portfolio entries. Will the teachers evaluate the portfolio? Will the students here do that? And number 5 here, determine how to score the portfolios. How are you going to give your students points for coming up with that compilation and for coming up with reflections on how they learned given the skill that you want them to develop? Most of the time, portfolios show that students have developed a certain skill. So it is often desirable to demonstrate that students have acquired a specific skill in a specific area, such as public speaking, or problem solving, or even the use of technology. Because these are assessment portfolios, attention must be paid to establishing relevant criteria. So if you want your students to show that they have learned a specific skill, you should establish the criteria. Or what are your standards for your students to be able to say, I have learned the skill? So you need to indicate acceptable standards of performance, and you need to select pieces that meet those standards. Additionally, educators must determine whether students may demonstrate the skills in any manner they choose, or whether specific tasks will be established for them. So, who should determine the skills that they need to choose? Should it be the students? Or should you as a teacher choose the skills that you want them to be recorded in their portfolio? Now, here are some characteristics of a portfolio assessment. Clearly defined purpose and learning targets. Systematic and organized collection of student products. Pre-established guidelines for what will be included. Student selection of some works that will be included. Student self-reflection and self-evaluation. Progress documented with specific products and/or evaluations. And portfolio conferences between students and teachers. So, yeah, you have to tell them what is really your purpose and what are your learning targets. How do you want them to organize their collection? What are your guidelines? What should be included? Should it include, for example, a video, a picture, or any other artifact that you want them to infuse? And then it is also important that the students can show to you the progress of their work. So you don't have to collect the portfolios only at the end of the semester. You can check on them every now and then to determine whether they have progressed or not. Now, here I'm going to show you some examples of portfolios for the physical education, for drama, for engineering, and for pharmacy. The reason why I'm doing this is that because I want to show you that this type of assessment is applicable to practically all disciplines. This is an example of a portfolio of an educational technology student. Her name is Caitlin Craig. And if you check the page, on the first column, the teacher or the student indicated the standards that will be used to test a certain skill. So you have here standard 1, standard 2, 3, 4, and 5. And for every standard, the student is expected to write her reflection and to indicate the artifacts as well. So I did not place here the student's reflection, but for the artifacts, it says here that the design is indicated. So Caitlin said, I have attached a couple of artifacts which show I met and exceeded the design component of educational technology. So in the succeeding pages, we can see some samples of artifacts. Here I'm showing the example of an e-portfolio in physical education. When I was watching a webinar, one of the questions posted there was that, can you do online teaching in physical education? Now, when I saw this in the net, apparently the answer is yes, and I have included here the source. So this is the portfolio of a teacher about his students. And in this compilation, the teacher put together all the portfolios of his students for us to check whether physical education can be taught online and what sort of skills can PE students do even if you do not face them the way we used to. Another example is a portfolio of a mechatronics engineering student. So you see, it can also be applicable to an engineering student. Here, the skill that the teacher wanted the student to show is about problem solving. And I'd like to read to the left side of your slide. Problem solving to increase production by clearing bottlenecks and to elevate production quality. So this is the student's documentation about what he did in terms of developing his problem solving skill. Another example is a portfolio of a pharmacy student. So we see here the lady's name, Narifa Nasruddin, and apparently the skills that her teacher wanted her to develop are the following: communication, represented by assignment 1, decision making, represented by assignment 2, and teamwork, represented by assignment 3. And for every assignment, the teacher wanted her to indicate what particular task she did in order to develop such skill, and then what action she took to address the skill that she wanted to develop. And what is not included in this slide is her reflection, what she did, how she learned, and how she perfected perhaps this particular skill that her teacher wanted her to develop. And I think the same thing happened for assignment 2 and assignment 3. She was required to indicate the situation or the task, the action, and then her reflection. There are some best practices that I want to share with you about ePortfolio as an assessment tool. You need to explain to your students what you expect them to do in their portfolios. Learners may have difficulty understanding the need for them to reflect on their work and the need for them to make connections between different courses and experience. So that's really very important. Establish clear expectations. Another best practice is start small. Help students to start small. Ask them to choose just one artifact, for example, such as an essay, and have them reflect on the challenges they had to address as they wrote their essay. Or have students select 2 assignments from different courses and have them reflect on how each of those assignments help them to better understand the other assignment. So that actually depends upon you. The clue here is that you need to start small. Don't overwhelm your students with big tasks, especially so that it's probably the first time for them to do this particular assessment. Now, let's assume that the ePortfolio has already been posted. How are you going to assess it? It says here, it may be assessed with a rubric based on the criteria aligned to your course intended learning outcomes. So be sure that your criteria are aligned with your intended learning outcomes for that particular course. So the implication here is that you need to design and develop your own rubric for that particular assignment or assessment. Another best practice is that you need to share their work to the class as a whole. You could create, for example, a discussion forum in an online space where students make helpful and encouraging comments on one another's ePortfolio. You can probably put up a gallery, so that depends upon you. So the ePortfolios then become an integral part of the online community of students. Another best practice is for you to answer the question, who evaluates your student's portfolio? 1, the student can evaluate it herself or himself to ensure that the student has not left out any detail. Probably you can prepare some kind of a checklist. Who evaluates? A peer review can do that as a way to help students get feedback before submitting artifacts or reflections for a grade. Or you can ask for an expert's review when a student does co-curricular work, such as a field experience class, internship, or oral presentation. And finally, of course, you can evaluate the portfolio yourself as the teacher. So you can have a combination or 2 or 3 here, or you can choose whatever suits you. Again, Who evaluates the work? You may require the student to make an oral presentation of the ePortfolio as part of your assessment strategy. I hope we have more time for that. And as ePortfolio, this documentation may be online so that others can evaluate and give comments. Of course, this is optional. You have to ask permission whether your student would allow this to be exposed or to be shown publicly. I have here a sample rubric to assess an ePortfolio. So for students to evaluate their own portfolio, I have it here. Of course, this is just a sample because we said that one best practice is to align your criteria with the outcome that you want your student to come up with. This is another type of a rubric. And you can see that in the first column, the criteria are indicated. For example, choice of documentation, organization, mechanics, and so on and so forth. And above this box are numbers 4, 3, 2, and 1. And you have criteria that corresponds with every number indicated above. So, see, I think it's easy to assess a portfolio using a rubric. So in summary, I have just presented to you the meaning, purpose, and the theory and practice of an assessment student portfolio. I have also shown to you some steps in designing and developing a portfolio and have shown to you examples and best practices in creating and assessing one. So I hope that you're going to consider portfolio as an alternative learning assessment. I would like to conclude by saying, minus the technology, the Bible is in itself a portfolio, in a sense that it records artifacts and reflections mostly about the learnings of his people. For instance, David, who wrote most of the chapters of the book of Psalms, documented his learnings as a little boy who killed Goliath, as a refugee running away from the wrath of King Saul, and then as a great king who cheated his competent soldier. David didn't have a website to demonstrate his versatility and fruitful learning experiences. But our omniscient God knows everything about David. So without a rubric, David was rated a man after God's own heart. In our case, we definitely need a rubric to give points to our students' collection of artifacts and reflections. Thank you for your time and have a nice day.